Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever in the world you may be joining us from. Welcome to Say It with Science, creating a climate resilient future. My name is Brandon Miller. I'm a meteorologist, supervising weather producer, and the climate crisis beat leader. It's a little bit of a mouthful at CNN. So I head up our climate coverage at CNN. So I have been covering climate change at CNN for well over a decade. So this is actually my third assessment report for the IPCC that I have been a part of covering. My expertise is in extreme weather, and most of my career at CNN has been in CNN International. So I've really been a part of covering every major extreme weather event for more than 15 years. So I've had sort of a front row seat at some of the impacts of these climate-fueled disasters, pretty much everyone we've seen over the years. So that's a little bit about me. I'm going to be moderating today's discussion. We've got a great panel of experts and activists, and we're going to really dive into this latest assessment report of the global climate, which I'm sure most of you joining us today are aware just released this week, early Monday morning, from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. So that is the IPCC. That is the United Nations climate science body, and these IPCC reports are really the gold standard. I refer to them, as many others do, as the state of the science. They're not out very frequently because they take a whole lot of work, and they're huge. They bring in a lot of research that they assess, and so they take 6 or 7 years. This one took an extra part of a year because of COVID, but this one really, and I feel like I say this every time there's one of these, but this one comes at a really pivotal time for climate action. So we're really going to dive into it, give you some of the details on what's in this report. And hopefully by the time this hour's up, you're going to see, one, just how important and why right now is so important for climate action, but also know a little bit more about the report and how it affects you and where you live. As we've seen 2021 so far, we've seen some really dramatic climate-fueled disasters all over the world. Where I am in the United States, out west, we've had these massive wildfires, this drought that's decades in the making, that's really worsening literally every week because of this extreme heat. We've had extreme heat waves that are unprecedented. Scientists have told us that these heat waves literally couldn't occur if it wasn't for the heat that we have been, trapping with our greenhouse gases. And it's not obviously here in the US only. In Europe, Asia, we've seen catastrophic flooding. Right now, we're seeing drought and wildfires in Europe as well. So it's really happening now. Climate change is no longer in the future. It's not even at our doorstep. It is busting through the door. So it is. This right now is a critical moment. Later this year, COP26 is happening in Glasgow. That's going to be the United Nations Climate Change Conference. And so this report that we're going over today really represents the scientific backbone. It's going to guide the delegates there at COP26 in the science. And the science is clear, guys. Delaying is not an option. In order to avoid global catastrophe like we have never seen, it's going to take bold, transformative climate action. So with that, it's my pleasure to introduce our first speaker, Cassie Flynn. Cassie is the UN Strategic Advisor on Climate Change. So Cassie, the IPCC, as we said, just released this sixth assessment report. More than 30 years they've been doing these reports. And this is, of course, just the first section, the physical science basis of climate change. And it's the one really with the most science in it. It's really deep in the science. So can you help break it down for us?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Thank you so much, Brendan. And it's such a pleasure to be here. And I think, this moment and this tagline that we have, say it with science, is so important because, as you mentioned, they're living the climate crisis in real time. We are looking around, we are seeing all of these things that are, quite frankly, really terrifying. And to think about, well, how are all of these things connected? What does it mean? This is the really key role that the IPCC plays. They help us to understand what's going on around us and what we can expect in the future and the ways in which we can do something about it. So I thought, in order to kind of get us started, what I would do is start with sort of 5 things about the IPCC report that I think are really important to know. And the first is that, the IPCC comes from a long line of incredible scientists that help to give us the latest information on science. And this report in particular plays a really important role. This report, as you mentioned, is about the physical basis. What is happening around us? What can we expect to happen in the future? And this derives from an immense amount of work. 14,000 scientific studies were included in this report. We have scientists, over 200 scientists from over 60 countries that helped make this happen. This happened over 8 years of time. And this report gives us a clearer and more accurate picture of what's going on with climate than we've ever really had before. So the second thing I want to emphasize is that it's telling us that these changes in the climate are widespread, they are rapid, and they are intensifying. We know so much now about how all of these things that we're seeing, whether it is the wildfires or the flooding or the drought or the increased and more erratic storms, we now know that there's a pattern behind all of these, that they're not isolated events. And the thing that they have in common is climate change. And the impacts of this, the incredible number of lives lost, the billions and trillions of dollars that are spent recovering from these crises, really are a part of a window into the future, is what the IPCC is telling us. And what's really important about this pattern is that we now know that the impacts that we have right now are part of this sort of increase in what we're seeing. So if we talk about sea level rise, we know that sea level rise is increasing at a rate that is faster than we've seen in 3,000 years. The IPCC told us that the last decade is warmer than the last 125,000 years. What we're seeing is really the cusp of a pattern of events that will only intensify over time. So number three is, how do we put all of this together? And the big number in this report is 1.5 degrees. And we talk about this a lot. We're already at 1.1 degrees Celsius of warming. And we really have a very short window until we reach this threshold of 1.5 degrees. In the Paris Agreement, countries are urged to do everything possible to keep us below 1.5 degrees, because we know this is where the tipping points start to happen. This is where we start to see these wildfires really start to intensify, the droughts start to intensify and become more frequent. This reality will only get hotter, drier, wetter, depending on where you are. And what's important about this is that every degree matters. I've heard a number of people say, well, hey, 1.5 degrees, what does that mean? That seems like nothing. But what the IPCC reminds us is that every degree matters. The difference between 1.1 where we are, 1.5 where we might reach in the next couple of decades, and then let alone 2 or 3, are countless lives lost and incredible hardship around the world, in every part of the world. This is going to affect every single person on the planet. So this brings me to number 4. How do we get ourselves out of this mess? There are ways that we can deal with this crisis, that although some of these impacts are locked in over the next few decades, we can make decisions now. But this is the thing, we have to act now. There is no more holding off. If you think about, the moments in time where the key decisions have to be made, it is right now. And countries are faced with this. You talked about COP26 in Glasgow. Countries are meant to show up at COP26 with these nationally determined contributions, these pledges that every country is responsible for to be addressing the climate crisis. And it's more important now than ever that these pledges are ambitious and that they really take into account the reality that the IPCC is telling us. These NDCs have to match the science. It's critical. So number 5, what does this mean for you? What does this mean for everybody who's looking out the window and saying, hey, I'm terrified. What can I do? And this is where I think Say It With Science really comes to be very, very important. Helping people to learn about climate science, helping people to understand this report, this IPCC report is, this is 3,500 pages. It's got a whole lot of graphs in it. It is very, very detailed. And you don't have to know every word, but it's important to read about it. It's important to understand what's happening in the world around us. Because the more that we can all be familiar with these patterns, with these ways that the world is changing, the more that it can be all hands on deck to help push countries, to help push businesses, to help push everyone to be as ambitious as possible. So thank you so much. And I'm really looking forward to a fantastic conversation.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Cassie. That was really good, and really good to go over some of the, I love the 5 things. It's, like you said, it's a giant report, thousands of pages. The fact that you can, distill it down to 5 key points is really important, and really important for everybody to see why it matters. And that's really what we're going to do next here. And that is, I want to introduce this kind of all-star panel that we have, so we can really dive into why it matters. So to help tackle that question, we're joined today by Selwyn Hart. Selwyn is the Special Advisor and Assistant Secretary General for Climate Change at the United Nations. Welcome, Selwyn. Dr. Paula Arias. Paula is IPCC author and professor at the University of Antioquia. And Alexandria Villaseñor is a climate activist and founder at Earth Uprising. And Jerome Foster. Jerome is founder of 1 Million of Us. And he's also the youngest member of President Biden's Environmental Justice Advisory Council. So a really all-star cast that we have for you here today. And so I'm going to ask some questions, get everybody talking, and then I'm going to bring in some questions that some people have submitted from the audience, and you can still submit them now, I believe. So please do, and we'll get to as many as we can over the next 45 minutes or so. The first question is going to go to you, Alexandria, and also Jerome, if you will weigh in as well, but we're going to start with Alexandria. Today is, as many of you may know, International Youth Day. So talk to us about your personal experiences. You both are, young people who are doing a lot in this space of climate change, climate activism. Why do you think climate change is such a big issue for young people today? Why do you think it resonates really so much more with young people than those of previous generations and older?
Well, I think that the reason why it's so important to take climate action right now is because our generation is going to be impacted the most by the climate crisis. I usually talk about a lot how every aspect of our life is going to change because of climate change. So where we end up living in the future, what kind of jobs we have, what careers we have. Some people are considering going into green careers so they can work on preserving our environment. There's even a lot of young people who are having conversations about whether or not they even want to have children because of climate change. And so it's definitely a really big issue. And since it impacts our generation the most, there's that urgency. And I mean, when the first IPCC report that came out in 2018, that sparked a lot of activism because that put us on the tight deadline of, when we need to get action by. And then the new IPCC report came out yesterday, of course, and it just reaffirmed everything that activists have been shouting for the last, 2 years now with the climate strikes and everything. And so there's something about hearing that we had 12 years left to act that got people out into the streets. And so I think that this IPCC report is having a similar effect in causing people to act. And so I hope that people do act and join youth activists, because when we protest, we have that urgency, and it's that timeline that makes our activism even more urgent.
Very good. Thank you. Jerome?
Yeah, and adding directly off of what Alexandria said earlier is that the reason why our generation organized and mobilized in such a way that it did is because of the fact that, one, we had a timeline, but also it was the understanding that environmental justice is at the root of all justice. And as I always say, that civil rights are human rights and human rights are environmental rights. Environmental justice is fighting for the core issues of clean air and clean water and basic equity. And I think that's really what spurred my generation to change, because Generation Z and millennials, we understand that intersectionality is at the basis of all justice. And that if you're fighting for gender equality or racial equality, no matter what, it's all one justice and all one movement for liberation and equality. So that's what spurred us to change, is because we understood that if we fought for people that are impacted first and worst, then by default, we're fighting for everyone. And we're fighting for us to be able to have that future that is sustainable and that is clean. So I think that's what spurred us, and that's what continues to motivate us and empower us to organize in our communities and the rest of our generation.
That's great. Yeah, thank you so much for that, guys. My generation, I'm certainly a little bit older than you both. Climate change, when it was taught to me in school and even in college when I was studying it in graduate school, it was still sort of seen as this thing that's far off. And it's the 2100s, the 2050s. For you guys, it's here, and it's here now, and it's what and it's so powerful. Both of you able to sort of ignite your generation, to recognize very early on. And I think the future of that generation is very bright. The next question I have is for you, Selwyn. To what extent will the UN Secretary General's climate strategy, be guided by what is in this IPCC report? We saw the language earlier this week, a code red for humanity. What does that mean, and how will it guide that strategy in these next couple of crucial months?
Thank you so much, Brendan, and really a pleasure to join all of you. And the Code Red for Humanity, that call by the Secretary General, really represents the situation where we are in right now. The reality is that the lives of billions of people, those lives are in immediate risk, and the futures of all of you, how you live, where you live, your quality of life will all be negatively impacted by the climate crisis. So this call by the Secretary General really was a clarion call to all leaders of government, leaders of business, leaders of civil society, leaders of financial institutions. Really, he's been very clear. There's no longer any room for excuses, no longer any room for delayed action. We must spare no effort to keep the 1.5 degree goal of the Paris Agreement within reach. It will prevent the worst impacts of climate change. It will not totally solve the problem, because at 1.1, 1.2 degrees of warming, we're also seeing massive impacts and climate justice. I fully agree with Jerome's comments that climate justice must be an integral part of national and the global response to the climate crisis, because there are persons, there are communities, there are people, there are countries that have not contributed to this problem or contributed minimally to this problem, who are currently living under imminent threat, harm, and danger. And we must do all that we can to support them to build resilience and adapt to the current and immediate changes that we're seeing in the global climate system. So this was a call for all hands on deck. No more excuses. We cannot delay. The Glasgow COP must be that moment where we accelerate action, where we do all that we can to keep the 1.5 degree goal within reach, and simultaneously protect people's livelihoods and communities from the climate emergency.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much for that, Selwyn. We're going to go to Paula next. Paula, this report makes it clear that climate is warming very fast. It already has. We talked about it, 1.1 degrees already, and we've even hit 1.2 degrees, in the last couple of years. So 1.5 is really right around the corner. Can we keep global warming in check? Is 1.5 still possible, or is it getting too late for that goal? We don't want to necessarily set something so ambitious that we can't do it. So I'm curious for your thoughts on that.
Thank you. In fact, this report tries to give that hope, like it is not too late. we are already in 1.1 degrees Celsius above the pre-industrial temperatures. We also know that during the next 2 decades, we will reach 1.5 degrees of warming, but it is possible to stay in that warming without increasing temperatures to further thresholds. But the real necessity is that we need to act now. We need a drastic, rapid, sustained, and global reductions of greenhouse gases. And it's not only dioxide carbon, but also, for instance, methane, that is also related with air quality, which is also a huge problem, environmental problem around the world. So this report really brings that. I mean, that's why is this signal, this red code that we are talking about, is because, yes, we can stay in 1.5 degrees, but we have to do something, and we have to do it now.
Very good. Yeah, we've, this is something we have been talking about for many of these assessment reports, is we have to do it now. We're running out of time. Another question for you, Paula, while I have you. At what point, we've seen this language from the IPCC change from 30 years ago, 20 years ago, 15 years ago, to the confidence level has increased so much. And now we know what we know, and there isn't a whole lot left, at least on the causes and the time frame, that we have yet. We can narrow it down, but this isn't a question of if, it's when. So I'm curious, look into your crystal ball there and tell me, in 6 or 7 years, when the next IPCC comes, this time we saw unequivocal, fact that climate is warming and humans are the cause, and this is when it's going to happen. Before that, it was the warming's unequivocal, and we're really pretty sure that humans are causing most of it. How do you think it increases next time? Where can we even go from here? Or is the next one we're out of time?
I think that this report goes beyond not only saying that it's unequivocal that the human activity has caused the warming. It's changing the climate. It's changing the system, and we are now sure that it is due to human activity. For instance, extreme weather is something that is a huge advance when you compare the R5 report with the current one, because there are a lot of science that is emerging, that is growing, and that we have evidences. But if you go into this report, you will see that this report goes beyond on the regional attribution. It's not only global, because that was something that maybe years before people thought this is global, this is, yes, the global atmosphere, the global oceans, but it's something that is not related to us in our region. This report brings us also evidence that this change is happening at regional level. The changes affects every region, but the changes are different. So that is something that I think is how we will go in science, and that the IPCC then will take that evidence to build more confidence on the regional level, not on the global. I don't think we need more evidence. That this evidence is really striking, that this change is happening, that it is us, and that is affecting every region. But now, because we have to think in adaptation, because it's a reality. I mean, it's not something that it will happen in the future. So we will have to adapt. And also we will have to start with mitigation strategies, very strong mitigation strategies. So it is very important to know what is happening at regional and even at sub-regional level. This report goes on regional level, that it is still broad when you think about what is happening in one city or in one particularly location in one country. We still have a lot of learning to have, but I think that is the path for this IPCC, going into the regional and even more local detail, and that this really becomes information that is really helpful for decision makers in the different countries. And that is a huge step that I will highlight of this 6th assessment report.
Yeah, very good. Thank you so much. And I've actually had the opportunity to learn about climate directly from Paula for about 15 years, as we were when I was in graduate school at Georgia Tech. She was there. So very much a rock star in climate science, and was, of course, one of the top first authors on the IPCC report by virtue of an A last name. So it's good to see your name right there at the top. For the next question, I'm going to go to you, Jerome. As we mentioned, the youngest member of President Biden's Environmental Justice Advisory Council. You really know that this isn't just about science and just about our physical planet. It's about people. So when you see this IPCC report and you read the news stories about it, what do you really want people to know and understand about what it means for our most vulnerable communities?
Absolutely. When it comes to our work within the Biden administration, working on Justice 40 and the environmental justice screening tool, it's all about how do we actually implement this into science. Lucky enough, I'm not in Congress debating with Republicans over whether it's real or not. We're actually working on the implementation of what actually needs to get done and what investment needs to go in communities. Specifically on my council, this IPCC report will go on to inform how we must have a civilian climate corps and the need for us to continue to champion a Green New Deal for public housing and a Green New Deal for public education, and all of those bold policies that are shown to be not ambitious and fairy tale like, but actually pragmatic and very much need to be instituted. So for us, this allows us to even have a stronger argument when we talk to Biden to make executive orders and to make investment into communities that need the seawall, need investment in training and transition from fossil fuels. So this directly makes sure that America is not just going to COP as a figurehead or just a puppet that's going in to spout words that's completely empty and hollow, but actually backing it up with domestic action that we're taking nationwide. So this is definitely a game changer.
So a follow-up to you, Jerome, and this would also be for Selwyn if you'd like to jump in as well. What do you think the U.S. needs to do, the Biden administration especially, to sort of reassert this sort of international climate credibility to the U.S. after, the pulling out of the Paris climate, getting back in? There's a little uneasy footing there. What is being done and what can be done to really put the U.S. out there and to help lead?
Yeah, I think that one of the ways that America cannot just come out and speak hollow words and actually back that up with fact is first making sure that we have a reconciliation bill that includes investment in our forests, investment in transition to renewable energy. And I also think that a lot of times it comes down to the aspect of equity, because a lot of times when we talk about investment into are well off and are insulated from the climate crisis for a short term. But when we look at Miami and we look at Louisiana, and we look at the fires that are raging all across California, we're seeing entire communities that are not given any assistance at all. And we're seeing kids my age, 12, 13, and 14, that are being prepared to be firefighters in schools. Like, that's the equivalent of us doing that. And I think that for America, in order for them to regain their reputation globally, we can't just, we're re-entering the Paris Climate Accords, but actually double down and make sure that we're also giving international aid to countries that we've hurt. We've continually and consistently polluted and destroyed entire communities because for the sake of marginal privileges and marginal improvements to society. But really we have to do is actually sit down with nations that we've hurt and destroyed and say, what can we do to help? And we're here to actually make sure that we're investing and not just seeing it as a handout, but seeing it as a piece of restoration and saying that we did this and we have to pay. We have to pay for the damages that we've done. And this is our symbol of saying that we're coming back and America's back to be a champion of the world.
Great. Thank you for that, Jerome. Yeah, that actually got me pumped up. I appreciate that. I love seeing your energy and passion for this subject matter. And it's actually a great transition over to you, Selwyn. Kind of transitioning from this IPCC report, which has obviously told us how much time we have left, which is none, needed to happen yesterday. to looking ahead to COP26 and what can we expect from world leaders, at that, big conference coming up in just a couple of months, and how can we, to what Jerome was speaking about, ensure that some of these wealthier countries are making the commitments that are needed to help those most impacted?
COP26 represents a really pivotal moment in the global response to the climate crisis. It will be a moment where all countries are represented, and we are insisting that countries, as they craft the outcomes of COP26, that those outcomes directly respond to the IPCC report and the root causes of the climate crisis. So the Secretary General has established 3 priorities. First, countries must do all that they can to keep the 1.5 degree goal of the Paris Agreement within reach. How do they do that? Cassie mentioned earlier, these national climate plans or nationally determined contributions. Countries must update and increase the ambition level of their NDCs in line with the 1.5 degree goal of the Paris Agreement. The G20 group of countries, they represent 80% of global emissions. We need leadership from this group. We need leadership from the G7. We need leadership from the United States. And the United States has already submitted a more ambitious nationally determined contribution. And as Jerome stated, they're also taking domestic action, credible domestic action that would bring credibility and integrity to this international commitment. We need all countries to do this, with the G20 countries taking the lead role. However, as I said earlier, we're also seeing unprecedented impacts in all parts of the world. If you live in Miami, or if you live in Mauritania or Mali, your ability and your capacity to respond to the climate crisis is significantly different. Developed countries pledged over a decade ago to provide $1 billion a year in climate finance. They've not met that target. That target must be met. The $100 billion goal must be met. And I encourage all of you working with your respective governments really to press and to push the developed countries to honor this decade-long commitment that has not been made. Adaptation and resilience finance has been the neglected half of the climate equation. It is estimated that current adaptation costs in the developing world is like $70 billion a year, and this will rise to as much as $300 billion a year by 2030. Currently, only $16.7 billion a year are devoted to adaptation finance. This is tragic. Lack of support for adaptation and resilience in the developing world, it's costing lives. It's costing lives and livelihoods, especially in countries that have not contributed to the climate crisis. So Glasgow must deliver. It must deliver on adaptation finance. And this is why the Secretary General has been calling on developed nations, donors, and the multilateral development banks to dedicate at least 50% of climate finance towards adaptation and resilience, because we are at a crisis moment. There's a massive gap between the 16.7 billion, which is on the table, and 300 billion a year by 2030. And we really, and these are countries and peoples and communities that are on the front line. So as you think about what is happening in your own community, in the United States or in Europe, also recognize that it's double, triple, 10 times worse in parts of the developing world. This report shows that Africa will be warming faster, and the rate of sea level rise will be faster in Africa. And as a continent, it's contributed a minimal amount to the problem of global warming.
Right. Well, thank you. Thank you for that. Alexandria, the next question is for you. How do we take this information, which is in the IPCC report, which is, like we said, very sciencey? How do you take that science and sort of take it to the streets, use it in your communities so that it's useful for the, your local advocacy?
Yeah, I think it's so important after we see science like this to go out and take some sort of action. And so
Right.
we can use the IPCC report to bring climate action into our own local communities by focusing on what's happening right outside our doors. I mean, in California, I have wildfire smoke right outside my home. And when you said climate change is busting through our door, I mean, yeah, that's literally what's happening for me. We're having a hard time keeping that smoke out of our home and staying safe. And so since 2018, in only 3 years, California has exceeded, this destruction of the campfire that was at the time in 2018, one of the largest wildfires that ever happened. And that's what sparked my activism. And so every year we've doubled that size. And so what we're hearing right now is that firefighters won't be able to put out these fires, and they're actually going to be burning all the way into winter, poisoning our air and water and making the historic drought California is already experiencing much, much worse. And so we can tie these local climate events to climate change by using attribution science. And so it's so important that we kind of tie what's happening in our communities and turning that into action. And so I know in the case of California's wildfires, climate change is making them burn hotter, faster, and longer, and they're much, much more destructive. So when it comes to local organizing, it all starts with this kind of education. We need to be educating ourselves and our neighbors about climate change and how it's affecting our communities. And then we need to organize and promote climate action right here in our local communities and within our own local institutions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I want to follow on that with you, Alexandria. You mentioned being in California, where so much of this climate change and climate fuel disasters is right in your face and in your backyard. But your activism has taken you all over the country, obviously. I'm curious if you find people there on the West Coast where there tend to be some more concrete examples of climate change impacting us now. If you think that makes people more ready to accept the challenge of and make the sacrifices that are necessary to combat this crisis head on, compared to maybe some of the rest of the country, maybe in some of the northern climates or East Coast where they're not seeing them day in and day out.
I do think it does. When you keep having these climate disasters, it definitely impacts people because you don't really get a break. It's something you see every single day. And so we have so many new local organizations that are fighting to preserve the local environment. We're fighting for our waterways and our forests and, better forest management and also better infrastructure, because when these fires happen, our infrastructure isn't that great, even so. And so there's so much that goes into it with the wildfires in California that I think that it's something that affects everybody's activism, because wildfires are a human rights issue because we don't have access to clean air or clean water. It's a human rights issue because it's impacting communities that are low income, and low income communities are bearing the brunt of these wildfires too. And so if you're a climate activist, of course you care about it. I think that a lot of these disasters that happen, like the wildfires, are honestly so intersectional with every single different issue out there. And so activists from all communities can band together when things like these disasters happen. So here in California, activism is specific. People will focus on making change to something that is right there in front of them. And so really focusing on economic support, mutual aid, and all of those things that can really better our local community.
Great. Thank you so much. I want to put this question out to everyone here and let you all sort of have a real quick response to it. And then we'll try to get to some questions that have come in. I know you guys have been, really heads down on this report and getting the news out of this report. But, just in the climate, not so much in the term we normally use, but in the overall climate of humanity, is really weary right now of disasters, of weather disasters, of COVID-19. It's tough to fight that fatigue. So I ask you, each one of you, to answer what makes you hopeful right now. Maybe it's something in the report, maybe it's something in the response you've seen. So for each of you real quick, we'll start with Paula. If you want to go ahead and start, what makes you hopeful for the future?
Being here today makes me hopeful. When I listen to Alexandria and I listen to Jerome and also to Selvin talking about the perspective of the UN, it makes me hopeful. I will say this as a human being, not as an IPCC author, but I will say that this is the opportunity to change the world. I mean, when we are talking about climate change and that we have to propose mitigation strategies for climate change, we have to think that what we really need to do is to end to the injustice, with the inequality, with all of this that is the real cause in my perspective of this physical changing that is having a lot of impacts. So this is a huge opportunity. Einstein used to say that a crisis is an opportunity. This is the opportunity to change the game, to change the path that mankind has followed and is in our hands. So it is really, really, for me, it's really important to be here and to listen all of you, because I think there are serious reasons for hope.
Great. Selwyn, you want to go next?
Well, as an islander and as a father, I have to be hopeful. I really cannot give up hope or abandon hope that the world will fail to respond to the really urgent needs of countries or people on the front lines, or to future generations. So, taking off my UN hat, while I share the anxiety and frustration and even sometimes anger that leaders have ignored this problem for such a long time, I nevertheless believe that we have to be hopeful. We can still change course. And you guys, you're not helpless. We need your voices more than ever. We need your advocacy. We need you to hold leaders accountable. So when I see these amazing young people on this call, I am hopeful. I'm hopeful for the future of my people in the Caribbean. And I'm also hopeful for Justin and Gabrielle as well.
Thank you. Jerome, you want to go next?
Yeah, I think that when we talk about hope, a lot of times it feels like just an emotion that just is with us and allows us to go out and organize. But hope comes from the collective action of community, and it comes from the elected officials that are here and the elected representatives that use moral clarity to guide their leadership and not greed and power. And that's really what hope is all about. It's about making sure that our emotions lead, and that our care and community care is something that is at the forefront of how we lead in this new decade. Because if we think about the mobilization that's needed, this is equivalent to the American space race. This is equivalent to the country and the world coming together and saying, are we going to stand up and make sure that we have this moment of, if you call it hope or call it optimism or call it ambition, whatever you call it, this period of action has to be driven by everyone coming together and saying, this is not about money. This is not about if I'm going to make a $2 here off of selling a gallon of oil. It's about, am I going to look out for the people at the front lines in the Caribbean and people that are in Bangladesh and people that are in so many communities that are relying on us to take this action. So going out of this today and having this really in-depth discussion, we have to remember that this is a moment of crisis, and that out of this crisis, we can't just wallow in fear and have some inkling of hope, but get out and let that fear and that anxiety and whatever you're feeling mobilize you and energize you to get out and organize and get out to be a part of whatever you can do, whether that's tweeting or signing a petition or holding community conferences like this. Everything that you do leads up to action. So know that within the scope of your power, you can do so much. So lean into that power and let's have a sustainable future together.
Love it. That's great. And Alexandria, last word for you quickly.
Yeah, I think that what makes me hopeful is the youth activist community. On the day the IPCC report was released, I held Instagram live streams with youth activists from the UK, Spain, and the Philippines. And so I was really blown away by how inspiring my peers really are. And so they were so articulate and educated about the climate crisis and solutions. And they were leaders in their own community too. the youth climate movement, I think, and Fridays for Future and all the other organizations around the world have done an incredible job connecting us and giving us the opportunity to work together and learn from one another. And so we have really created a supported global network and community to share stories and solutions with one another. So think about how, as we become adults, we already have these global relationships and networks already in place. And so this means that we can respond to the challenges that the climate crisis presents to us.
Very good. Thank you. So with some of the time that we have left, about 5 minutes or so here before our final thoughts, I'm going to ask some questions that have come into us. And one of them is on one of those ways we can, start to reduce some of these emissions. Paula, this question's for you because you mentioned methane in this report. And that was something that stuck out to me very much in this report compared to previous assessments as well, as, it sort of painted methane as this, secondary villain. It's not just carbon dioxide, and really maybe some of the chances in the immediate term to really hit some of these ambitious targets we're getting towards very quickly would come from reducing methane. Could you tell us why that is and how it could happen?
So the reductions of methane are very important, not only because they are a greenhouse gas, but also because they are related to air quality in cities. So particularly if you think what is happening in air quality controls in the cities, what is happening is that aerosol emissions are trying to reduce, and the aerosols try to cool the atmosphere. So when you reduce those aerosols, then you have like a strengthened warming of the greenhouse CO2 and other greenhouse gases. So then you will have to also reduce methane. So in order to compensate the increase that is implicit in the reduction of aerosols. The particular ways how we can reduce methane is something that is included in the working group 3. Remember that the panel has 3 working groups. The first one is the one that I am involved in, and is the report that we are seeing right now is focused on the physical basis of climate. So how it's changing and why. The second group is more focused on the impact. So there we will learn what is happening with biodiversity, what is happening with ecosystems, and also the vulnerabilities. All this social part that is crucial for climate change. And then the third group is more on mitigation. So exactly how can we reduce the methane emissions, like including agriculture or any other sector, is coming on this particular report, the third group, that is going to be released on next year, first semester of 2022.
Great. Thank you. For Jerome and Alexandria, a real quick question for you. It's one that I'm sure you get all the time, and I know I do as well. What can people do individually, sort of on their own, at their own homes, in their own communities, to fight this battle of the climate crisis?
Yeah,
Alexandria, go ahead.
I think that the first thing that I recommend to anyone to do when it comes to more individual action is to find your climate story. So how are you being impacted by the climate crisis? Everyone's being impacted by the climate crisis in some way because we're seeing the effects in different ways all around the world. So just find out how you're being impacted. And then from there, find a group or an organization that really resonates with you, that works on the message that you want to focus on for taking some sort of action. Because I think that finding a group of people and getting connected helps you stay in the movement so much longer, because you're in a support system, you have friends. And then from there, get to work, start doing some sort of action, because this is more of a marathon and not really a sprint. So it's also important to take care of yourself so that you don't really go into activist burnout. So those are the 4 things that I recommend. Find your story, find your group, make connections, and take care of yourself.
Very good. Thank you. Jerome, how about you?
Yeah, absolutely. Really echoing the words of Alexandria there. Like, I remember really just telling people when I first started out working in bipartisan organizing of how do we get climate to depoliticize and just organize in our communities. It was a lot of times people just doing individual action just meant doing whatever you could. Like if you are an artist, or if you are a documentary filmmaker, if you're a person who's good in like tech, or someone who's good in finance, all of that is useful. So I think that a lot of people like to think about, well, my work career is different from my activism career. But the movement needs so many different skills. It needs websites. It needs designs. It needs movement leaders that can speak. It needs people that are writing the policy and writing those policy briefs and things like that. Everyone is welcome. So connecting with that organization, whether that's Fridays for Future, whether that's Earth Uprising, whether that's 1 Million of Us, whether that's the Sunrise Movement, there's so many different orgs that have so many different theories of change that you can just be a part of, and be a part of that ever-growing movement of climate justice. So remember that it started out with one person with Greta, and it started out with a person before that with G. Scott. And it was like, literally, it just grows from within you, and just do whatever you can. So not being prescriptive at all, just follow your heart and follow what drives you to be a part of this movement.
Yeah, very good. Thank you so much. You know, I love both of those. Sort of find your story really resonates with me, as well as the kind of idea of get in where you fit in. So really, really smart words there, guys. Thank you so much, everybody, for being on this panel. Thank you, UN Foundation, for putting this together, coming up with such a great panel, such a diverse group of people from all aspects of life and expertise. We were really lucky to have this time to talk with you. But we do have just a little bit of time left. So for some closing thoughts, it's my pleasure to introduce Rajesh Mirchandani, who is the Chief Communications Officer of the United Nations Foundation. Rajesh, floor is yours.
Brandon, thank you so much. And thank you for doing such a great job. Panelists, Alexandria, Jerome, Paula, Selwyn, and Cassie, fantastic. Just, you continually inspire me every time I am lucky enough to be on a Zoom call or in an event with you whenever I hear or speak to you. And I just want to kind of pick up on one thing, Jerome, that you said. Hope comes from the collective action of communities. And everyone on this call, everyone watching this today is a community, just like the communities of your own at home. Communities across countries, communities across sectors and generations. And that's what we need. We need all of them to come together. The world's done it before. After the Second World War, when the world was in tatters, nations all gathered and they chose cooperation over conflict and created the UN to prevent another world war and maintain peace in the world. So we've done the cooperation thing before. And this is an equally big existential crisis for the world. And we can only do it, we can only get through it by working together. And when we all understand the facts of climate change, when we have a common language of science, that's how we can work together to find solutions. And that's the reason we created Say It With Science. It's a movement that aims to connect IPC science, which is the gold standard, to as many people around the world, especially to young people who are fired up over what they see happening to the planet you will inherit, and who can also offer solutions as well as your voices. We're going to put the website link, Say It With Science, in chat. Please check it out. In the resources section of that website, you'll see there's a link to a toolkit that we updated since Monday's IPCC report launch. It has new shareable facts and findings. It's there for you. Make it your own. Use it in your advocacy. Drive the conversation using the best and the latest science. One thing I think about when I think about our job in communications at the UN Foundation, what we try and do, what I think we do, is that what we should do is empower young people, help them see that the issues they're engaged with are all being worked on by many other people around the world, help them connect them to those communities, empower them, give them a platform, and then get out of the way, because you're coming. And as far as I'm concerned, I can't wait for you to come fast enough. So I hope that these resources will be useful to you. It's important that we base climate policy on science. And this is an important year to do that. As we've heard, the UN General Assembly is coming up, when the UN will host a big meeting on climate. And then there's the COP at the end of the year in November. This year, the next 4 months, will help shape and set climate policy for the next 5 years. So please do join us in making as much noise and demanding more. Let's say it with science, and let's get this work done, because we have no time to lose. So with that, thank you all for speaking, sharing your wisdom and your leadership. And thank you all for tuning in as well. Brandon, back to you to close us out in the same amazing way you've done for the whole hour. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Rajesh. And thanks again to all of our speakers on the panel. This really was, I hope everybody was able to benefit as much from this hour as I was. Thanks again for coming today, being on here virtually, and to learn more about the IPCC and Say It With Science. Be sure to visit, as Rajesh said, www.sayitwithscience.org and check out the resources there for science advocacy. And also be on the lookout for some more events coming in September and November. As we talked about, it's going to be a busy couple of months for the climate science community, for battling the climate crisis. And let's just remember, we are all in this together. Thanks again. It was my pleasure to join you today, and have a great rest of the day. Thanks so much.